That's fast. And looks still moving up.
Yeah, so Yulong, I think you're good to go. It looks like we've got people joining and the recording has started. So please take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon, everyone. And my name is Yulong Ding, and I'm chairing this early session of this, and then to start the session actually. So there's not much I need to say about the housekeeping. And when speakers are speaking, probably just mute yourself, and any questions just type into the Q&A part, and so they'll be brought up at the panel session. And the arrangement today is first we have 4 presentations. I'm going to share those 4 presentations, and then will be followed by a panel discussion, which will be chaired by Jim, and he's showing his face here. And not much change, Jim, and since we last see, so great. And finally, we're closing at 4:30. So, okay. I think it's better to just start with the first session, and we have 4 presentations, as I mentioned, and the first presentation is to be given by Jim. And a very brief introduction to Jim. Jim is head of policy development at Northern Power Grid, and he's leading the delivery of customer propositions that supports transition to a smart, more flexible energy systems. And since he's joining Northern Power Grid in 2004, that's a while ago, his network experience also consists of smart grid innovation projects and regulatory issues and program management. So and also involved in price control, which is important, price control reviews that set revenues for monopoly businesses. Jim joined the industry in 1991 and previously worked for E.ON, and also in a number of technical and managerial roles in power generation business before moving to electrical distribution business. So Jim, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Yulong. Really good to be with you and with colleagues in the conference this afternoon. And I'm going to rattle through a few slides and just give a perspective, I suppose, in terms of kind of a customer angle, really, I suppose. But first off, I should just continue with the sort of the introductions that you've already had to me. So Emma, I think you've got the controls. If you could wind it forward 1, I'd appreciate it, please. Because just in terms of the who we are, so we're based there in Yorkshire in the northeast of England. Some of you will know, and we are a classic 24/7 business. This is all about our key service lines, if you like, using all our assets are about keeping the lights on, and also about resilience and reliability. So doing whatever it can to keep those lights on, hooking people up, and increasingly, of course, it's about supporting decarbonisation. And it's also about thinking about ways we can do that don't involve just assets, but also involve much more customer flexibility and those kind of things. So I just want to sort of expand upon that and use my remarks today just to sort of set the scene, hopefully lead to some interesting questions in your head as you think about your areas of specialism. I'm very aware, as I face out to a number of you, some of you I know quite well, you've got a lot of specialisms there, and it's really, I think, I'm trying to sort of paint a broad canvas for you then to poke a few interesting questions my way. So next slide, please. Thank you. I guess first thing to point out, I mean, this is about the sort of whole systems thinking that we've got here. So there I am in distribution on that top row, electricity distribution. That's our bread and butter business, but we're really aware that we are just one bit of supporting all the pieces of the jigsaw that you see on this slide. And increasingly, we're always interested in what we can do to support all the other things on this slide, not just lower our bit of the bill. And when you look on the right-hand side of this slide and all the decarbonisation issues that are coming down the track in terms of phasing out of internal combustion engines, we're getting more EVs on the road, changes to heating, and more electrification of heat, still questions over hydrogen and what we can do to support the hydrogen economy and what shape that will take, government consultation out at the moment. All these things, we spend a lot of time thinking about this because that's the real change agenda. It's how we can maintain our low cost service and how we can do that in a resilient way and how we can support decarbonisation. So next slide, please, Emma. Thank you. So you're not supposed to read this one. It's just about say, I guess we're always interested in looking at it through the lens of the customer. So as you can see from this, you get the idea. This is about, in this case, a young couple, but we've done other sort of types of customers, if you like. How does the world change from waking up in the morning to going to bed at night? The role of flexible energy systems and how's that role? That's very much the angle that we're thinking about, and really viewing that as an opportunity rather than a problem. So really thinking about how can all this increased flexibility in the system down at the low voltage level, and all these changes in behaviour, particularly at the sort of more domestic end. How is that going to change what we're doing, in addition to the change of industrialisation and decarbonisation that end as well. So next one, please. So as we've been thinking about our approaches to this, down the left-hand side of this, these are the sort of key planks of how we're approaching decarbonisation at the moment. This is where it's interesting because I would think that a number of you listening to this right now and thinking your bodies of research, if you like, or where we can collaborate, we think, yeah, I think I can fit into at least one of these on the left-hand side. I'll come back to flexibility first. I've mentioned about whole system, which is really about, say, reaching into the transport sector, if you like, and thinking more broadly than just waiting there for the customer to ask us for a connection or that sort of thing. Data and digitalization, a massive part of what we're doing. It's going to be key to the transition. Openness, transparency. This is about our changing role and earning the trust of our stakeholders to do this, because there's always concern from some quarters of the competitive sector as to what we should be doing as a network operator and the regulated entity compared to the competitive market. So that's really facing up to that, I suppose, and just having an honest and candid exchange with our stakeholders about what their issues are and how we can resolve those issues, or how we can be transparent to earn that trust of our stakeholders. And it's also about making sure that we bring forward the right workforce of the future as we continue to see lots of retirements, how we move that forward, and changing skill base as data and digitalization, for example, requires that. So I said I'd come back to flexibility first. And this is this kind of aspect of, as we think about how we need to invest in our network, one of the ways that we're looking to manage cost is make sure that we make much better use of data and digitalization to monitor what's going on. Use customer flexibility to manage that where we can, if we can defer the need to reinforce parts of the network by asking customers to do things differently, or just observing that they're doing things differently, so we can get comfortable with that level of use of our network. And then only when it's absolutely necessary do we go and reinforce. And when we do reinforce, we're looking for synergies with our sort of asset condition replacement programs. So that's the sort of thing we're doing. And when we talk about flexibility, it comes in these kind of 4 forms that you see there. The first 3 are associated with customer flexibility. So active network management, that's the curious acronym you got there. That's about saying to some customers, as we do today, how can we give you a cheaper and quicker connection if you give us rights to disconnect you at certain times, and if you're prepared to take that risk, we can give you a cheaper and quicker connection. The second one, D&O contract flexibility. This is where we know of pinch points on our network, and we can strike deals with customers to buy that flexibility to cause them to dip under, and by entering commercial arrangements with them rather than asset arrangements, building new assets to build bigger transformers. How can we live within the means we've got? So that's one of the ways we can manage this. The price-driven flexibility is about recognizing, again, whole system thinking. People are going to start doing things differently. They're going to start the standard patterns of use that we've been used to as people start to incorporate, say, an electric vehicle or some electrical heating solution into their lifestyle. That's going to change to differences in use of the network. So we need to take account of that. So it's not triggered necessarily by us, but we need to make sure we take account of that. And we think there's benefit. And the next slide will tell you a bit more about that. And then the network flexibility is also recognizing there are smart grid solutions, if you like, that we can bolt on technology to some of our existing network assets to get more out of them. So a classic case would be things like dynamic rating of assets, where we're taking into account temperature in terms of how hard we run our assets, or voltage regulation to manage within the physical constraints of our network. So let's move it forward, please, Emma, if we can move to the next one. Thank you. So there's loads of stuff going on at the moment. I'm not going to go through this in detail. It's a short presentation, but on the left-hand side, we're doing a lot in flexibility markets. I talked about DNO contracted flexibility. That's what this is. How can we strike deals with our customers? So we've been going out since 2018 to try and stimulate that market, see what's available, see how we can make that work, and building our processes. On the flexible connections, I've covered that. That's about the ability to curtail bits of our network. So it's another form of customer contract, just with the connectee, where they get an immediate benefit from a much cheaper connection, because they're not having to pay their share of the reinforcement of the network. So we've already got a lot of that going on in our network, have done for many years, and we're building out more the capability to scale it up as customers want it. It's really in response to customer need. And then the last, and on the right hand side of this, on the data and digitalization, I guess the first thing to note is this isn't a thing about tomorrow through the 2020s, this is about right now. So we've got probably the most comprehensive network upgrade program we've had in a while, where we're changing the sensors on our network, all the backhaul and the comms infrastructure. We run a massive private communications network in Yorkshire and the northeast of England, and also the kind of the brains that's incorporating that to move that data around, and that's including right now further down towards the low voltage end of the network. So a lot of the 2020s is about the low voltage end of the network. That's a lot of where the change is going to be taking place from what we've been used to. So that's going on there, and we've been speaking a lot to our stakeholders. So we've really been trying to craft this into some of the business planning we've been doing, and thinking about the 2020s quite hard about what we need to do to achieve that. So there's going to be more of this LV monitoring is in our plans as we push out, so that we cover more of the LV network. Next slide, please, Emma. Thank you. This is the slide I just sort of said we'll be coming along. So this is not just a question about the 2020s. This is about thinking a bit longer term than that, thinking out to 2050, thinking about net zero targets, what needs to happen, what could happen. You see on this, on the y-axis here, you've got gross peak demand, one of the things we care about a lot in terms of how much power is being used in our network. So here you see the classic doubling of demand on the network by 2050. If you squint at it and don't use your calculator, you've got that sort of doubling effect going on there. But it really does depend on some of those pathways. So the lower pathway is more of a hydrogen economy. The upper pathway is more of a full electrification economy, crudely. We've got a planning scenario, which is that, which is the bottom line there. The point of the line above it is to say, I talked about price-driven flexibility. If we envisage, we think that some of the behaviours of customers to minimise their bill and do the right thing for matching their supply with the availability of low carbon generation, we think it's going to suppress some of the loading on our network. So if you like, our customers on the distribution part of their bill get almost a free ride, in the sense that we won't have to invest as much as we otherwise would have done if they hadn't been changing their behaviours in response to the decarbonisation agenda, if that makes sense. So that's helping to, we think that's going to suppress a bit of demand, that effect. I mean, that's a big chunk of demand there. You know, you can see the difference. It opens up to quite a sizable thing. So part of the reason that monitoring will be to look to see if that does indeed transpire, because a model is a model, and we need to make sure we've got that going. The other significant thing here, from the blobs you see, these are about primary substations. So we've got about 500-600 of these things, the big substations around our network. In the ED2 period, sorry, that's the 2020s, the middle of the 5-year period in 23 to 28, we think there's about 19 of those that could see the need for action, where we'll need to do something, where that's one of the things on the right hand side there, or indeed network reinforcement. It might be reinforcement, but it's rising to 90 in the 5 years that follow. So when you get into the 2028 to the early 30s kind of period, the size of the prize, if you like, and us being able to come up with cheaper, innovative ways to do that using either customer flexibility or network flexibility, opens up for us, because there's a bigger number. There's 90 of these substations that are modelling to, if the peak load is at the top of the fan chart that we set out there. So it's a major issue for us. But in terms of what we're doing in the 23 to 28 period, the so-called ED2 period, along the right hand side, you can see some of the things we're doing there. So we think it'll be worth to our customers savings of £113 million if that comes along, if they respond to these time of use tariffs from suppliers and things. We think we're going to make use of DNO contractor flexibility where we can save another 14.8 million. Big savings from network flexibility and those kind of things. And also that go further faster. I guess the reason why it's a different colour is that we're thinking about what can we do to stimulate the market for more commercial interactions with our customers in the period of the 2020s ahead of that big blob 90 coming along. It's worth us investing in some of that to try and form relationships, work both with big customers and with the aggregators of low voltage loads, so people with smart charging networks for electric vehicles, vehicle to grid. I see there's a few advocates of that in the audience. Those kind of technologies, what can we do with those, or with the storage community at the domestic level? These are all massively important things. So what flexibility resource have we got at the low voltage level that can assist us? So I think next slide, please. I think I'm going to start to sort of bring it into land a bit now, Emma. Lots of stuff going on there. I mean, key bits, industry collaboration, that's our trade association, the Energy Network Association. So we're working with transmission distribution, that part of the system, working really closely. Flexible power, that's a toolkit that we're working with the other regional distribution network operators, try and standardize where we can. We've got a plan that we've put out there with a strategy for distribution system operation. We're working with some of you on our customer-led distribution system project. So thinking about some of these ways, how this new world's going to operate so we can think about it ahead, and sharing of open data. So all sorts of things going on. Next slide, please. And this is my final one, Yolong, before I hand back to yourself. So just some key messages to leave you with and maybe stimulate some questions for the panel. It'd be great to hear from you. So I've already said low voltage system, massively important. It's all about changing customer energy practices. We're really mindful the resilience of the system gets even more important with all this going on. It's not an or statement. This is an and it's even more important. We've got new sources of flexibility at the LV level. It's opportunity as well as problem, and it's all about the data and digitalization. Yolong, that's it for me. Quick canter through. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. We will ask questions at the end of the session. So could we invite Bernard to have from Q Technology for the next presentation? And Emily, can you share your presentation?
Yes,
oh, great, thank you. Emily is economics, so that's why I don't need to introduce much and as economics, because I don't know much about that. So I'll leave the floor to you to introduce your stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolong. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I don't think it's my first time presenting at one of the Supergen events, but hopefully I can contribute, advanced views from the last time we presented. We work quite closely with the Supergen Bioenergy Hub. Definitely enjoy working with the team. And I'm from Q Technology, representing the business development section of the business. And I'm here today to talk to you a bit about what we do, what our technology, how it works, what it does, and how we're working to contribute towards net zero, and how we see, the key challenges that we're facing, key concepts, and how we're hoping to work together with Supergen, policies, others in the industry, to overcome the challenge we have to achieve, the common goal of net zero. So first of all, just double checking, can everyone hear me well and see the slides?
Yes,
yes.
Perfect. And I'll also be rattling through. So for the introduction to Q slides, there's quite a few, and I'm happy to share the slides afterwards, but I'll rattle through them so I can get to the core points of the presentation, as Jim said. So next one, so who we are, for those that are not as familiar with us, the premise of our company is derived from, decarbonisation being one of the most significant challenges of the current century, and we contribute to overcoming this challenge through a solution that can not only reduce carbon emissions, but also allow a shift to zero waste whilst producing high value end products. And all in all, we're a sustainable energy solutions company, technology providers, but we also work with partners and clients in industry to develop projects as well. Here's a bit about our journey from the early stages of developing the technology, proving the concept from R&D into an actual commercial demonstrator, working with the likes of the Bayes Department, DFT, and others, as well as crucially ETI, who have significantly helped us achieve what we have so far by funding our commercial scale demonstrator. For those not as familiar with the ETI, they're a public-private partnership between UK government, Bayes, I believe, and the likes of Rolls-Royce, Shell, BP, and E.ON. And since our involvement with the ETI, we've developed greatly, both in technology and commercially. And we now work as part of the industrial clusters, but we also work with commercial clients. And we've recently formed a joint venture with SHV Energy, who you might know better as their parent company of Keller Gas in the UK. I think they're one of the biggest companies worldwide that nobody's ever heard of, but people usually have heard of their subsidiaries. And then our current status is, we're entering full operation with our first of a kind plant and looking to deploy modular plants of the same type worldwide, working with the likes of Scheffler to do the module build, etc. Now, I've touched on this a bit whilst introducing the company, but the challenge that we focus on overcoming, I like using the phrase, we lie at the heart of two parallel market evolutions. On one side, you have the race for corporate net zero, although I should probably change the wording of that because it's not just corporate net zero, it's a global net zero ambition, where we're all focused on decarbonizations of operations and, reduction of emissions, as well as shifting to zero waste as part of the circular economy. We need to decarbonize our energy systems as part of the energy transition. And then on the other hand, there's an evolving landscape with waste, where incineration is no longer the default. The carbon reduction story is no longer as compelling. It's also going to be quite carbon intensive without any carbon capture. Following the coal leaving the grid, it will be the most carbon intensive. So we need to really focus on answering the question of how do we prioritize our waste resource. Now, a little bit, I won't spend too long talking about this, but I'm happy, of course, to take conversations offline and talk through about what we do in a bit more detail and what product offerings we have and how we'd like to work with others. But in very simple terms, I could spend probably days talking about the technology, where we've developed a commercially viable, flexible, and modular deployable technology. It's advanced conversion technology, but the core technology is advanced gasification, and the core USPs associated with those is feedstock flexibility. We also have demonstrated it at scale just outside of Birmingham, so you're welcome to come and visit, as well as we're trying to change the traditional way of energy from waste plants to become, rather than stick-built, deploy them in a modular way to achieve cost reduction, efficiency, as well as swifter project delivery. And we're also working with large companies to be able to have the balance sheet to be able to provide the product and project guarantees. And because of another very unique point that enables the fundable element as well as the commercially viable element is our advanced gasification system operates at pressure. So it enables a lot of efficiency, but also reduces the footprint significantly. Over here, I just have a quick slide to just show what exactly a product deployment offering is. And we have various forms of the technology, all using waste and biomass residues. And we're able to provide syngas, which can be used for multiple reasons. We have grade B syngas, which is a bit of a dirtier one, but it's still good enough as a pressurized natural gas substitute, for example, can be combusted at high temperature and replace, help heavy industry decarbonize. But we also have the XT, which is anything to equilibrium, where the upgraded syngas can be used as a reductant gas or for electricity, for example. And then we also have the XTF, where you can further upgrade the syngas to fuels, varying from hydrogen, dimethyl ether, methane, or jet fuel. So it's quite output flexible, which is great. And can help, the fuels part will be quite critical in being able to decarbonize harder to decarbonize sectors. And then just lastly, the quick point about the key differentiator and where the core IP lies is around the equilibrium approach reformer, which enables us to take a variety of feedstocks and it stabilizes it in the reformation process and you end up with a hydrogen consistent syngas. And these feedstocks can range from, digestate, RDF, also hazardous waste due to the temperatures the process operates as. And taking all these feedstocks, you can put them through the process, and it's carbon capture ready, which enables us to, to be one of the limited technologies, usually known as BECCS, that can achieve negative carbon capability. And up for discussion, of course, but as you all know, to achieve net zero, we're going to need some low carbon solutions, zero carbon solutions, but also those negative carbon solutions to balance it all out. And we're hoping to be able to contribute to that landscape. Here's a few quick pictures of what the Sustainable Energy Centre looks like, and we'd be happy to welcome visitors there. I'd also like to make a note for this platform that, we're developing this as a centre of excellence for technology development. So we'd love to work with academia and researchers to, who would like to demonstrate bits and pieces of technologies. And just lastly, before I go on to our alignment with Supergen and areas we'd like to collaborate on, is, you're probably wondering, with all, with the output flexibility and the flexible nature of the technology, what are Q actually going to focus on? And this is how we've developed a twin commercialization route, where we're developing two pipelines in parallel. On one side, industrial co-location, which focuses on decentralized applications. And then on the other side is a centralized fuel application, which utilizes the same core technology, but on a more multiplexed scale, that will produce predominantly dimethyl ether. So that's the joint venture we're developing with SHV Energy, but also crucially, that will enable us to gain the track record to make fuels an easier fuel to produce in the short term, to be able to build the platform and the credibility to exploit the, the aviation fuel market and prove the waste to syngas element of the technology in time as the Fischer-Tropsch, for example, or the syngas to fuel technologies are developing. So we're able to provide short-term solutions as well as supporting the medium to long-term solutions and product markets. Sorry, I'm probably talking too fast, but hopefully you're still catching most of what I'm saying. And over here we have we've noted a few points of how we align with the Supergen. So the Supergen, as you all know, does a great job across a variety of activities. And with regards to what we focus on and work on, we're very interested and aligned on working together on resource elements, the core technology element, and being able to do some R&D and optimizations of parts of the process, but also the vectors elements and the end products and things to do with how you can integrate those into the existing infrastructures, or how to, optimize the use of those molecules in the best possible applications, for example. We recognize the importance of the system, and it's important to commercialize the technology, but we can't do that alone. We have to work with academia, who provide, immense support and input, and also work with policy, etc., which I'll actually come to in a bit. And as for the areas of collaboration, we see the most ones, looking at resources. Supergen's done a lot of work around, biomass and other feedstocks that we're able to kind of really take as input into our knowledge, and to be able to progress and commercialize and know what to use and what's best, for efficiency and product output, etc. Also research themes regarding, oxygen supply, which, as a lot of you know, is quite expensive. And not one of the most capex intensive items, as well as parasitic heavy load. But there's also energy vectors, which we're interested in collaborating on, mainly around chemical intermediates and further hydrogen purification, and also technical and product standards for emerging products and vectors that aren't as known. For example, when I say hydrogen or aviation fuel or chemical intermediates, they're very well accepted and widely known. But if I say dimethyl ether, which is DME, not as many people recognize it or recognize the benefits that it could actually be. It's a critical fuel and product that can help decarbonize harder areas such as off-grid sectors, etc., but has a bit more difficulty as it's an emerging product in an emerging market. So not the most straightforward to work with. And last but not least, I think the biggest part that's becoming of increasing importance to Q, and I think to others in the sector, and just wider really, is policy alignment. We're starting to see a lot of things coming out, technologies being supported, products getting recognized, grants a whole bunch of things, and I've listed a few that come at the top of my head. You know, there's a new red directive, there's the waste infrastructure, there's the UK ETS coming up, and it's really critical that I think as together we work together on alignment, and it's not really more a competition. It's more that we all need to get our heads together and align on things to achieve the common goal, which is net zero, because it's without the right policy in place and the right regulation in place, it will be really difficult for innovative and emerging technologies like ourselves and others. We were discussing with others in the sector, for example, about the Environment Agency, the ATT consultation, and the difficulties that could have for the sector if they're implemented. And a lot of it isn't about because people aren't aligned or people are competing. What I'm starting to find as well is there's not enough knowledge in the people implementing such guidelines, especially under the EA. Sometimes they're just not as aware or as up to speed with the rapid innovations happening, and no one's to blame. It's just a matter of how we align, but to align how we inform and make sure everyone involved in the process is well informed. But yes, this is up for discussion, and love to hear others' points of view on this. And I'll just run through these slides, but I think a big part of it is the waste to value element. And how we need to prioritize that waste resource in alignment with what the CCE is saying, and keeping chemical energy as chemical energy, which leads to a new step in the waste hierarchy, which is conversion. And I would love to discuss this with others, but I think I'm running out of time now, so I'll skip through this as well. And I would love to discuss with more of you the things that we could do to work together to achieve the common goal, which is net zero. And I think it's all about, it's one goal, but it's not one solution. And for everyone to recognize that, I think is really important. And I am seeing a lot of people realize that, and it's going to be really exciting to hopefully work together with all of you on this. And thank you.
Thank you, Amina. And so questions will be after the session. So, okay, so we're going to move to the next presentation to be given by David Bold, and from Ørsted Wind Power. Is that correct? So,
yeah.
David is a lead R&D specialist, and so I don't want to spend time to introduce you much. I think it's just the floor is yours, David.
Great, thanks, Yulang. I hope you can see my slides okay just now.
Yes, we can see very well.
I'm going to start with an apology. I'm afraid I've been gradually losing my voice throughout today, so sorry if I croak at any point. I'll pick it back up after a drink of water. So yeah, as Yulang mentioned, my name is Dave Bold. I'm lead R&D specialist for Ørsted, where I'm responsible for our research collaborations with universities and research organisations. And I also sit on the Industrial Advisory Board for Supergen Offshore Renewable Energy. So today I want to talk to you about our vision, Ørsted's vision for the future of offshore wind energy, what challenges that entails, and why those challenges mean that we need to collaborate with academia more now than we ever did. We've only got 10 minutes and quite a lot of topics to cover, so I'm not going to spend much time telling you about Ørsted. I'll just say that we're a developer, owner and operator of green energy assets, and we've got a particular focus on offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, hydrogen and bioenergy. We've got more offshore wind installed capacity than anyone else, and that's both in the UK and globally. I'm based in our offshore wind business unit, and that's what I'm going to focus on mostly today. So I think most people would recognise that offshore wind power is generally regarded now as a success story of innovation and R&D, as we've managed to achieve massive upscaling and cost reduction, and in a very short period of time. So the world's first offshore wind farm was commissioned in 1991. So it's really only several decades since that became a reality. And that kind of begs the question, do we really need to keep focusing on R&D? Or should we settle into a routine of business as usual now? And obviously I'm biased, I work in R&D, but my answer is very definitely R&D is more important now than it ever was. And that's because offshore wind is coming to play a more and more significant role in our energy systems. So at Ørsted, we have a vision that the setting for offshore wind will continue to evolve really rapidly in the next decade. So up to 2030, this timeline takes us. We're going to see radical changes in the markets that we're working in the energy systems that we're part of, in the scale of what we're doing, surrounding the impacts that we have on the environment, and also in the cost competition that we're faced with. So the next few slides, they just outline that vision of how we see the world for offshore wind through to around about 2030, and the challenges that we need to tackle to make sure that offshore wind is still a success story a decade from now. And those are the challenges that we really need to tackle in collaboration with our partners in academia. There are much broader, much grander challenges than we can tackle by ourselves. So until now, you could say that offshore wind has been pretty much confined to a handful of European countries. It's been pretty much a European exercise overall. The UK and Denmark have taken a particularly leading role right from the start of offshore wind. But that's changing really rapidly now. There are a lot of governments around the world waking up to the idea that offshore wind can provide great amounts of low-cost green energy. And we're seeing a real push to develop offshore wind in the Northeast US and several Asian countries. And a lot more countries and regions have signaled that they have an interest to do the same as well. So that provides us a great opportunity, obviously, but also a great challenge. So we know how to develop high quality, low cost offshore wind assets using the established experienced supply chains in Europe. But we need to work out how we do that and still provide sufficient local content. So that is used primarily local suppliers in our newer markets. So there's a lot of work to be done here around standardization, modularization, and just making sure that we can build assets to the same standards no matter where we are in the world and who we're working with. And then one of the really hot topics at the moment is how the market for fixed wind is going to migrate into a floating wind market. And although I think we could say that we're still at the pre-commercial phase for floating wind, it's really rapidly becoming a strong commercial opportunity. And by 2030, I really expect there to be full-scale commercial floating wind farms out there and a huge pipeline of commercially viable opportunities, and particularly in the countries and regions where bottom fixed isn't so viable. And that implies a whole new range of engineering, consenting, and commercial challenges that we're really only just starting to wrap our heads around. So integrated energy solutions, this is really just a continuation of a very strong trend that we're already seeing. So that conventional generation is being phased out in favor of renewables, and renewables are assuming more and more responsibility for stabilization and balancing of electrical grids. So this means that we need to keep developing the suite of grid ancillary services that we provide to grid operators. So things like frequency response, black start, synthetic inertia, that side of things. By 2030, we fully expect that much of our export capacity will begin to go through some form of integrated energy storage. So whether that's battery storage or power to X, for instance, hydrogen is a big new field for us. And obviously, we're seeing that grids are becoming more and more complex, and stable operation of them is becoming more and more difficult. So we see a real role there for increased digitalization of entire energy systems to make sure that they can be effectively managed. So it's kind of partly the idea of smart grids, and then how we as green energy operators interact with those grids. We can say that we generate green energy, we can be proud of that, but we definitely can't say that what we do has no environmental impact. And we know there are still a lot of great things we can do to improve our sustainability practices as well. So we're a heavy manufacturing industry, and we know that we can still make significant improvements in the energy efficiency of that manufacturing. and also that we need to really work to reduce our dependency on scarce and hazardous materials. So for instance, in making of the generators for wind turbines. We also can't claim that installing arrays doesn't have some environmental impact. So we have to keep working to continually reduce that impact. So a good example there would be the new technologies we're looking at to reduce noise when we're driving monopiles into the seabed, or the technologies we're looking at to reduce emissions from installation and operations vessels in the fleet. Generally, we would design our wind farms to last for 25 years, potentially more nowadays as well. But at the end of our lifetime, we often have a responsibility to decommission them as well. So to remove what we've installed and to do that in an environmentally sensitive way. And I think generally speaking, you could say that if we can install them, we can pull them out again. And to some degree, that's true. But we still have a lot of work to do to refine that process. And recycling, so particularly of composites, such as they're used in turbine blades, is a really live research topic for us at the moment. And then we're now also seeing really ambitious targets for offshore wind deployment globally. But in Europe, for instance, there's talk of up to 450 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity by 2050. And that's up from just 22 gigawatts today. So crazy as it seems, we might just not have the space to do that unless we can come up with better ways of cohabiting sea space with other uses. So fisheries, transport, oil and gas, and so on. There are really, let's say, famous stories of significant leaders in the wind industry years ago predicting that turbines will never go above 2 megawatts or will never install a monopile of more than 25 meters of water. I think those predictions have invariably turned out to be entirely wrong. I think most people in the industry with any sense would avoid predicting anything of the sort nowadays. And actually quite the opposite. I think it's scale, volume, and learning that have brought offshore wind to be the success that it is just now. And I'm sure it's continued increases like these that will deliver the tens and the hundreds of gigawatts that are in the pipeline now. And of course, engineering on that scale is a massive challenge, so we need to be sure that we keep improving and enforcing standards and leveraging new digital techniques wherever possible as well. But overall, we can safely say that 12 megawatt turbines, gigawatt scale arrays, 40-meter water depths, that's nothing compared to what we're going to be looking at in 2030. And that brings us back to cost, which always has been, always will be the most important factor in determining how successful offshore wind is in capturing a role in our energy systems. So we've become more than competitive with conventional generation, but we've done that with the help of really significant government subsidies. And those subsidies are rapidly disappearing in a lot of markets, and we need to adapt to seeing our outputs with no guarantee of price. I guess our goal was once to outcompete fossil fuels, but now our competition very much comes from other forms of renewable energy, so solar and onshore wind as good examples. And all of those sectors as well have become very effective at driving down costs, and obviously need to keep doing that for their own good as well, and for the good of the energy sector in general, and we just need to keep pace with that. And finally, on this slide, we need to keep improving the investment case for very large scale offshore wind. So the assets we build now are exceptionally expensive, and to build the amount of offshore wind capacity needed to meet our climate goals, we need to attract investment from very large investment funds. So we're talking on the scale of pension funds, and they're obviously highly conservative investors, and that means we need to maintain a focus on continuing to reduce our risk. And that's arguably not an easy thing to do as we more and more leave production subsidies behind us. So we're definitely not short on challenges, but between us, we certainly have the skills and the talent and the knowledge to overcome those challenges, as long as we can make sure we're working together to deliver the greatest impact in the shortest possible time, because we're working in the context of an emergency now. To my mind, the real value of the Supergen hubs, or the greatest value in the Supergen hubs, is helping to find a healthy balance between collaboration, coordination, and competition. So gathering input from industry, academia, and other stakeholders to coordinate the research landscape and make sure that we're all pulling in the same direction. Making sure that the methods of collaboration are streamlined. So, for instance, in terms of funding, contracting, IPR, and so on, so that different organizations with different goals and motivations can work together more easily for mutual benefit. Am I out of time, Yulong?
Oh, yes.
I've got about 30 seconds more, if that's okay. So I'll just say very quickly something about Supergen ORE in particular. So in my experience, we've been doing a fantastic job of supporting collaboration that delivers real impact. So the quality of the projects being supported through their flex funding, for instance, is exceptional and shows a really strong alignment with industry needs, but also involvement of a lot of academia and industry. And it's also provided a great meeting and networking point for us. We've kicked off a lot of really exciting projects through contacts we've made in Supergen ORE. And I was hoping to talk about one in particular today, but actually we didn't get a press release ready. But hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll be announcing a big natural environment research project with Supergen ORE partners. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and David, and fantastic. And so we'll move straight to our last presentation by David Harvey from AFC Energy. David, could you share your screen? And so David is talking to about fuel cell technologies. So I don't pretend to know anything about that, but just listen to David. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak with everyone today. So, brief intro. My name is David Harvey. I'm CTO for AFC Energy. AFC Energy is a fuel cell company that is headquartered in Dunsfold Park here in Cranley in the UK. We have roughly 50 employees. We're currently expanding rapidly in the areas of research, development, manufacturing, and deployment. The company has 3 core technologies. So we have Alchem, which is a AEM polymer system, and we have a liquid electrolyte fuel cell system, and we have a solid polymer electrolyte fuel cell system. The company has historically been focused largely on the liquid electrolyte systems. Those were for large-scale industrial applications. Over the last 18 months, the company has been highly focused on accelerating the solid polymer technologies in order to introduce high power density solid polymer AEM fuel cell systems. Looking at that portfolio, what we can see is there is a big shift in the power density moving from a liquid electrolyte system over to a solid polymer system. One of the key enabling technology components of the AEM systems is the ability to accept low-grade hydrogen. And this will come into some of our discussions on the applications in some later slides. The key differentiator, though, between a liquid electrolyte system and the solid polymer system is this driver on high power density, which means smaller footprints, lower costs, and higher overall power levels when we look at customer applications that scale into the megawatt levels. The company's markets today are focused on EV charging, so rapid electric vehicle charging, into the temporary power and provision of power to the construction industries, and looking at the way in which we help our customers decarbonize in those sectors. Looking forward and looking into areas where there's massive potential to decarbonize, we see this is in the industries around maritime. So if we look at ports, we look at the very large container vessels, international shipping. This is where we see there is a massive push and a massive emerging market around the decarbonization in those industries. If we look within EV charging and we look at some of the success points that AFC has had, one of the highlight points is the Extreme E race series. So I'm not sure if everyone has followed kind of the follow-on to Formula E. This is a world's first all-electric off-road SUV rally race The whole purpose of this race is to highlight and raise awareness of climate change in the various different regions around the world. So race locations have included Greenland, Saudi, Senegal, and recently within the last week, AFC has successfully powered the third racing round in Greenland, following the successes we had in providing power to the race in both Senegal and Saudi Arabia. The system we distributed in this has been able to provide about 2 megawatts of clean power to the overall race series, and the entire series is basically kicked off in February and will conclude towards the end of the year. When we move from EV charging and we move from this kind of nearer term decarbonization market and we move into this more forward-looking perspective, this is where we come into the marine sector. And if we look in marine, there's been some very big developments in the sector where the IMO in 2018 announced a commitment to a strategy to decarbonize. And their commitment was to decarbonize international shipping by 50% based on the 2008 greenhouse gas emission levels. Part of this decarbonization was then looking at what type of fuels and what methods could be used to eliminate those carbon emissions. And in 2021, the World Bank essentially indicated that ammonia and hydrogen were critical in allowing maritime to meet the GHG reduction targets. However, fuel cells and hydrogen have a challenge in this industry. And the industry challenge is, if we look at the vessels and we look at the amount of hydrogen that needs to be deployed, if we looked at pure hydrogen storage, the space on the vessels is extremely challenging to store the amount of fuel required for the operational use of the vessels. In addition to that, the footprint, the capex, and the fuel usage based on the characteristics of the hydrogen fuel cell also need to be improved in order to make this truly the enabling technology for decarbonization in that sector. When we look at the portfolio of how we would do this, or where are the vectors to this, ammonia carriers show far improved energy density compared to hydrogen in those vessels. And ammonia will represent roughly about 25% of the maritime fuel by 2050. So what we see is ammonia is going to be an extremely significant player, in particular as well, that while the 50% reduction is the target that's been released by the IMO, there's a further goal of the announcement to pursue efforts to fully eliminate carbon emissions. So when we look at ammonia as a carrier, ammonia is the only significant CO2-free carrier that could be used within this industry. So ammonia is a massive player in enabling marine to decarbonize. Where we now come back to in looking at fuel cell systems, in order for fuel cell systems then to have a play in that sector, they have to be able to work with hydrogen derived from ammonia, which means tolerance to lower grade hydrogen in both membranes and catalysts. And it means looking at also improved efficiency in order to reduce the amount of fuel usage from those fuel cell systems in providing the power. So there are two enabling ways to do that. One is through the choice of the membranes, and then additionally through improved catalytic materials. And then lastly, in order to fit the footprint in those vessels, there is an improvement that has to happen in the materials and the packaging for the overall fuel cell system. Now, AFC's focus in this industry has been on two major prongs of technology. One is on the conversion of ammonia from a hydrogen carrier to hydrogen fuel. And the second has been on the improvement of the stack technology in the alkaline electrolyte space through improvements on membranes and catalysts for tolerance to ammonia, for lifetime, and for efficiency and power density. So those really major underpinnings of being able to push our technology into this market at a cost-effective and enabling way. So if we now come to where the existing challenges are and where there's opportunities to work together as part of the Supergen cluster and research hub, and as well as points of collaboration with other industries. This comes on the concept of fuel carriers and hydrogen conversion, so increased availability of green ammonia, improvements in the technology used to crack ammonia into hydrogen, including miniaturization, improvements of catalysts to improve the efficiency of that overall reaction, and then reductions in the capex cost of those systems. Further, being able to then develop improved fuel cell catalyst materials that demonstrate tolerance to high levels of ammonia in both the fuel and potentially in the cathode streams. The second part of this now also comes that ammonia obviously is not the only carrier. There are other hydrogen carriers, methanol being one, and recently in the last 2 weeks, Maersk, one of the major shipping companies, has announced a move to methanol as part of their target to do greenhouse gas emission reduction. There is the aspect of being able to do net zero methanol, and this was touched on in terms of e-fuels in an earlier presentation. Fuel cells can leverage these net zero e-fuels in producing hydrogen from the stored energy. But once again, we need improvements in the reforming technology, miniaturization in order to reduce the footprints, improvements in the capex and in the robustness of the catalyst used in the systems, and then further improvements in fuel cell materials in order to take away some of the requirements on the reformers and crackers by having more tolerant anode fuel cell catalyst materials, so both to ammonia, but as well to carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide. And then the last part of this enabler is if we look at this sector or this category around technology, and we look at both PEM technology as well as AEM technology, significant advancements in selective filtration provide the ability to use higher density fuel carriers and then translate that into higher quality hydrogen. So a very significant enabling technology is selective filtration. So being able to drive low cost, high quality hydrogen filtration on site with low parasitic energy demand. And this is a real underpinning of this future marine and, let's say, for example, even rail markets, where the ability to store pure hydrogen on the vessel or on the vehicle is more difficult. When we look at our stack technology and areas for collaboration, always improvements in materials, so low cost bipolar plates, improvements in plate coatings to drive total cost of ownership through extensions and durability, improvements in the performance of both platinum group, platinum alloy, and non-platinum group catalyst materials makes a significant impact on both the longevity and cost of stack technology. Thirdly, the improved contamination tolerance for catalysts is a real underpinning part of being able to use basically hydrogen carriers and leverage the energy density that we can get in storage on non-hydrogen storage systems. On a system level, multi-stage recirculation pumps for hydrogen, these go significantly to reducing or to improving your system efficiencies. Miniaturization on CO2 filtration and scrubbing are underpinning technologies that are important for alkaline space fuel cells. Something that has always dogged or been very important in the fuel cell industry is low-cost power conversion. Anecdotally, there was a story with a colleague who worked in the electronics industry who I had gone to for DC-DC converters, and he said, well, when we get to 1 million units, we're low cost. And the context of 1 million units in fuel cells in early days and early commercial is massive. So being able to right-side the scaling of DC-DC and power conversion technologies to the deployment volumes within fuel cells is an extremely important aspect of the success of the technology. And then lastly, diversification and ethical sourcing of materials. We've heard lots of discussions about battery materials and fuel cell materials and where those catalysts are sourced and is that done in an ethical way. Continuing to improve our supply chains and ensure we have diversification in suppliers is an extremely important part of making a holistic and robust ethical industry. And then lastly is reduction in CO2 from the production of our sourced components, because obviously, while we want to help decarbonize, we also have to look at decarbonization ourselves and what that means as part of our value chain. And then lastly, with our Alchem polymers, we're always looking for partners and developers who are interested in looking at collaboration opportunities to explore the use of the alkaline material into other industries, electrolyzers and hydrogen production, desalination, CO2 electrolysis. There are many different areas where polymer-based systems are extremely important, and having access to low-cost, high-volume polymers is certainly an enabling technology. And this is an area where we would like to be able to explore more and leverage both within the Supergen Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Hub, but also through to the other hubs that move around this. With that, I'll leave it for any questions or comments.
Thank you, David. It's great. Oh, there is some sort of echo. So, okay. So I think I managed to to be 15 minutes longer. So, so my suggestion is that I passed on to Jim directly, but also passing 2 questions to Jim for the panel to discuss. One is the question in the chat box is about misalignment of different ambitions of different stakeholders and academia, industry, and government, and so on and so forth. So source from the panel would be very much appreciated. Secondly is about the storage of ammonia, which is a technology which is for about the safety aspects, I suppose, contamination and safety aspects. So Jim, so I pass the floor on to you, and I will be an audience, ask questions. Thank you very much, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Yulong, and we'll give you for your overrun. I'm not sure it's completely your fault. And maybe the chief protagonists are people like me, and we're on a virtual stage now. I think on this virtual stage, I think I'm being joined by a rush of professors. So I think the idea was that on our panel, if you like, as well as the 4 speakers you just heard from, myself included, we've also got Professor John Irvine from St Andrews University, I think, going to join us on stage here. And I see that John's specialisms are about contributions, world-leading contributions to the science of energy materials, especially fuel cell energy conversion techniques. Also, Professor Anthony Kusanak from Imperial College London. Hi there, Anthony, I can see you there. Anthony is Professor of Physical Chemistry, extensive experience in the study of aspects of solid polymer electrolyte fuel cells, supercapacitors, and the design of new electrochemical techniques. And also Professor Phil Taylor from Bristol University, an internationally leading researcher and industrial expert in energy systems. So welcome to the panel, folks. Good to have you on it. And I wonder if I ought to maybe just, in the first instance, I'm not ignoring the comments from the chat room, Yulong, I've seen them as well. We'll come back to those. But before we just go to that, I wonder if John, Anthony, Phil, if each of you want to give just a couple of minutes, just quick introduction to what you see as some of the priorities, maybe some reflections you've got on some of the presentations you've heard, or even some things you haven't even heard yet and you think a bit missing, and you want to spike the guns of the audience, please, before we start answering the questions. So John, Anthony, Phil, John, I'll pass to you in the first instance. Just a couple of minutes, any perspectives you want to share, please?
Thank you. I wasn't quite expecting that, but I think the whole system and how everything works together is absolutely critical. You know, how fuel cells can interact with enabling the grid, or how hydrogen can store electricity, or how we can interact with biomass processing using electrolysis and then producing synthetic fuels. So I would strongly emphasize the synergy, because that's where the real gains are to be, and perhaps where the UK might actually be able to help lead if it's got a big picture approach on how we reduce fossil fuel usage and emissions.
Thanks, John. That's a useful comment there. Thank you. And Anthony, from yourself, please.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and thanks for the invitation to be on this panel. I think I'd like to reiterate what John said, but also just talk about, you know, what we see moving into the future is the availability of, you know, potentially excess renewable electricity. And of course, electrochemistry allows us to take that renewable electricity and then do chemistry with it. Of course, what we've talked about a little bit so far is hydrogen, but of course that's only a small part of the sorts of things that we can actually do. And of course, longer term, what we want to try and do is we want to try and reduce the fossil fuels that we use as much as possible and reserve those fossil fuels for those things that we can't easily replace. So, you know, what I see the future being is taking renewable electricity and combining that with raw materials, might be CO2 from the air, for instance, in the very long future, right? And then using those to generate the hydrocarbons that we need for our society, not only as fuels, but for things like plastics and beyond. So I think, you know, where I want us to be in 50 years' time is an area where the only stuff we pull out of the ground, which ultimately once you've pulled it out of the ground, you know, that's it, you know, it's gone, is used for things that we really have to use it for, as opposed to things like transport fuels, which is, you know, nature is giving us all this free energy. Why don't we try and use it, you know, for the day-to-day things? That might be a little bit provocative, but, you know, that's my view for where you know, I want to see the world in 50 years' time. You know, and that also involves using all sorts of biomass as well, right? You know, trying to use the stuff that we get effectively for free rather than digging stuff out of the ground.
No, I get it. Thank you. Thanks, Anthony. Appreciate that. And there's a bit of resonance between yours and John's comments, I think, there in terms of whole system perspectives, circular economy, those kind of things. Phil, can I hand over to you, please?
Thanks, Jim, and thanks for the opportunity to join the panel. Just some reflections really from listening to the excellent presentations today. I guess given the urgency of action for the transition towards net zero, I think there's a real imperative and responsibility on all of us to work more closely together, and that's across the hubs themselves and between academia and industry. And I think maybe what we can see here is that there are a number of companies that have a particular collaboration set up with one of the hubs. But I think given what John said and others about whole systems approaches and a systems perspective, actually what we could really usefully do is collaborate more across the hubs themselves and join up the industry groups across those hubs as well, so that we can really start to have those whole systems conversations. I think that as well as doing that, I think that we should look more at more mobility for people between academia and industry. I think a lot of people tend to have an industry track or an academic track, and I think as somebody who has dual roles in industry and in academia, I would recommend that, but I would also recommend more mobility so people can move backwards and forwards between industry and academia. It's something I've done three or four times now in my career, and I think that helps and will help us collaborate and deal with the urgency that we have. I think we've got to find ways to take more risks as well in our projects, demonstrate technologies, take risks, but obviously manage safety. And I think there are some challenges because of the unbundled and privatized nature of the energy sector in the UK about how do you really collaborate and bring competitors together. I think David talked a little bit about the balance between collaboration and competition, and I think we need to find ways to navigate that to keep things moving forward as well. So just a few thoughts there anyway. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Appreciate that. And I think actually you started to get to some of the questions. So I think there's a nice segue there. I'm going to force one anyway. Amna, a warning to you, I'm about to put you on the spot if you don't mind. Because I think your last slide in your presentation started going at this. So one of the first questions we had in this was from Thomas Minter, and he was talking about potential unaligned ambitions between different stakeholder groups. I remember a slide you put on about different policy perspectives. You were sort of describing a cloud of stuff going on, and saying how do we get that going across? So anything you want to add to that, I suppose, in terms of the question is specifically, I suppose, about how much research and funding effort we're allocating to messaging and stakeholder engagement, but I guess you can talk around that. And also I'll just add in the follow-up question that came on, which was I think where Phil was going with his comment just then about any barriers to more collaboration and how we can overcome them. Do you want to just have a have a fertile bout of that, and then I'll look for some offers of volunteers from the rest of the panel to pick up on some of those themes as well. So Amna, over to you.
Sure, of course, I'll try my best. Firstly, I didn't get to spend that much time on that final slide. It was a key one. Strongly underestimated how fast I can talk. Lesson for next time. But no, it's a really, really good question. And I'll come to how much, actually I'll answer the how much you're investing, I suppose, in the messaging part to put our hands up as an SME. We've struggled in the past to do that. You know, we've kind of focused on surviving and getting over the valley of death in such a difficult technical field. But it's something that we're definitely, now that we're entering commercialization, realizing the increasing importance of it. And I see changing mentalities to pay more attention of it. Us ourselves as Q, I definitely think we can do more with it. And invest more in it, especially as we're realizing, like I mentioned, the increasing importance of the message alignment, and us realizing, you know, everyone has a different perspective on something, but a lot of the times I've sat on panels or discussions or, you know, internal debates or external ones with industry, investment, policy people, and people are saying different things, but then when you're actually listening, you're like, hang on a second, we're all saying the same thing in different ways. So I think that provides a risk where people think they're saying different things and going different ways, and then nobody is aligned. It's a really important one to attack. And I think as Q, we definitely haven't invested enough in it, and it's something we're looking to do more on and to work with others to do more on, because it's not something that you can do alone. And as an industry, I would strongly encourage that we start doing that, because building on Philip's comment, what I would add to his comment about whole system thinking is there's a lot of, you know, people competing, and David touched on this as well about balance between competition and collaboration. A lot of people tend to think, you know, this is all competition and everyone wants to be the leader and everything. But I think there's a, you know, a certain amount of competition is always good, but there's a certain point where we all have to maybe just stop, take a step back, and together look at the whole picture. And when I say the whole picture, it's looking at, you know, whether it's feedstock, whether it's technology, whether it's the product end vectors. We need to take a step back, look at the whole picture, and really ask the difficult question of what's the best application for each thing, whether it's feedstock, whether it's the technology, whether it's the product. What energy vector is best in decarbonizing what sector, what feedstock is best for what technology, and prioritize and match. You know, it's a difficult one to have the right answer for, but I think, you know, just taking a step back and working together, and of course bringing it back to Thomas's question, the way to do that is absolutely through communicating better, through better stakeholder engagement and messaging. And I'd actually like, you know, to invite the panel to suggest ways from their experience into how this can be done, because it's really important, and we all need to work together. I'm a strong believer of there isn't a silver bullet. It's multiple technologies, multiple solutions. It is one goal, but not one solution. So yes, I think David can help save me now.
I don't think saving necessary. Absolutely agree with everything you said. And I also don't want it to be overstated, perhaps. You know, I feel like in the energy sector, particularly in offshore renewables, where I have my experience, we're actually rather good at collaborating between industry and academia. I don't want the message to come off that, you know, we're completely failing at this and we need to restart. But I think there are probably two main barriers in my mind. And one is, I think for academia, it can be hard to understand what the research needs of industry are, and therefore what research is likely to be taken up by industry and actually applied in the real world and deliver impact. And that's on us in industry to be better at communicating our needs, to not keep our cards close to our chest and consider that some kind of competitive advantage. And in the other direction, I think it can be hard for us in industry to understand the value of what's being developed at lower TRL. And if we don't understand it well enough, it's very hard for us to make investment decisions on technologies, research knowledge that might not generate any kind of turnaround for us in the next even 10 years, 15 years. So I think there's, you know, we can share a bit more there about how we develop our investment decisions and business models and how lower TRL research can be supported by industry and fed into industry application. And then as a side, there's probably something there around funding. So, improving public funding, joining it up a bit better so that industry and academia can work together under the same funding schemes, and helping us make investment decisions in earlier TRL research by supporting that investment.
Thanks, David. John, you've got your hand up. Do you want to add something in?
Yeah, very much add to this, what David and also what Phil put in earlier. From some of the projects I'm involved with, I can see there's very often much said about industry academia collaboration, some funding streams, I should say. But actually, when it breaks down, it still looks like academic and industry funding. And I think you need carrots to say that the industry can work with academia. Some of that work can be industry driven, some can be academia driven, but there must also be a major crossover at the TRLs where academia can learn what the real drivers are. So I think we need to redesign the funding and get away from the Innovate UK EPSRC models that we have at the moment and find something that works in between. I mean, people have tried, but they haven't succeeded that I've seen so far.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, John. Thanks the rest of you. I might just add, going back to Thomas Minter's original question, and just a couple of my own perspectives, if I may. I think we've done a lot of stakeholder engagement in the last year because we're building a plan for several £1 billion of investment, and it's wholly appropriate and expected that if we're going to bring forward investment in our network for the 2020s period, which is so important in terms of decarbonisation pathways, we better make sure we've definitely listened and collaborated across the piece, all groups of stakeholders, customers, etc. And one of the things I think we've recognised about 52,000 stakeholders that we've engaged in the last year. So it's a massive stakeholder engagement exercise, and a lot of our business plan has been about decarbonisation because it's the hot topic that's changed. So reliability of an electricity network has always been there. Doing it safely has always been there. None of those things we're walking backwards on, but the decarbonisation agenda, the whole net zero, that's been the key one. So we've really learned from that. It's been quite, in some aspects, it's been quite a baptism of fire. I think certainly in terms of our customers, we've worked out that we've really got to work on our messaging, and we've got to drop even, it's amazing how much they want us to sort out our language and communicate more effectively. And we've had a Fairness for the Future panel that's really been helping us with that, and some energy champions. Also, we've been with the changing nature of government and the rise of local government and devolved authorities and their role in transport planning and these kind of things. It means that not only are we having to deal with national politicians, but much more local and local area energy planning, those kind of things. So I think that's really caused us to think about how we communicate. And I guess what we've recognized that we've always got to be planning in the way that we convey things, that we've always got to be doing a fair degree of education and information and getting on the same page before we can ask people, what do you think? You've got to actually be speaking the same language before you then move into, now let's work together. So there's always, I think that's kind of helped us on that. So I think it's a great question, as you said, Amna, and I think there's some of our sort of reflections from that. But Amna, I think you want to come back on something there. You had another thought, unless it's a legacy hand. It's a fresh hand, is it?
It's actually a question to you.
Righty.
A follow-up one to your answer to Thomas, because as I mentioned, we're starting to spend more time and resource in the messaging and engagement, and you've done a lot with the public, and you mentioned local authorities as well. So the question to me is, from the past few months that we've started to look at it and try and spend more time and given resource on it, we're seeing the need to tailor the message for the audience, which I assume is a basic of communication. but how different do you think the jargon, the terminology, speaking the same language, and then tailoring that to whether we're speaking to the general public, whether we're speaking to the investment community, whether we're speaking to local authorities especially, how different or how much effort do you think is spent trying to tailor the message? Or is it that you actually think one message can be communicated to all?
No, not really, Anna. I think the classic of knowing your audience and speaking to your audience in a way that can cut through to them is absolutely vital. What some of the work we've done with our energy champions has really just caused us to go back to basics a lot more, and think, some of the terminology we're using, things like assets, investment, these are just terms that we would think that's not jargon, but a lot of our customers will say, well, no, you're just losing us there. We're just glazing over. So the ability to cut through and get through to our customers has been really key. But this isn't about being derogatory at all. It's fully respecting them. It's just recognizing that we're not always dealing with engaged people who this is their number one issue. We're dealing with people who are leading busy lives and they don't really want to think about this. So I think the other significant thing for us is that we've recognized that all of us with a stake in this, or with got some expertise in various bits of it, and there's a whole load of you with expertise out there, we've all got a kind of an extra commitment to sort of reach out, lean in, do our bit to help society, I suppose, in whatever way we can in terms of doing that. Whether it's speaking to citizens' assemblies, for example, I know a number of you will have done that, I'm sure. Yeah, just sort of sharing some of your knowledge and helping some of those groups. It's just helping that society. It's linking those things together. So yeah, absolutely tailoring our messages. Anthony, you got your hand up.
Yeah, so I suppose reflecting on some of these comments and the interactions between companies and for instance universities, it's probably also important to realise that our energy system is in a state of significant flux. So in the past, those energy companies that would have interacted or have interacted with universities are relatively large incumbents who have been funding positions or funding interactions sort of very much along the status quo. Whereas now we've got a lot of younger companies that are growing up and trying to take part in this new environment. And typically they don't either have the time or the money to be able to engage with universities in the same sort of way. For instance, if you look at the research councils, typically they allow industrially funded case studentships, but it's much easier for large companies to get those than, for instance, small SMEs, where there might be the possibility of funding projects with the university to answer a specific question, putting a PhD on it, for instance. So I think there is the need to actually sort of evolve that system to allow smaller companies, especially ones that are bringing in the new technologies, to be able to interact and, for instance, co-fund projects in the same way that has been done traditionally. The other point I'd say is that the Supergens, I think, have spent a lot of effort in trying to engage with industrial companies as much as possible in terms of the time available. It's one of those difficulties that, of course, we don't have people, or we have very few people that can actually spend their entire time trying to do those sorts of interactions. Very much it's done in a piecemeal, way. And finally, I suppose the important point to say is that I think academics are very important in terms of the growth and development of new SMEs. We've already heard, from academics in previous days who have actually spun out a number of companies, trying to take their fundamental research and actually spin it out into SMEs. So I think there is quite a rich environment that's evolving around all of this at this time, and it's important to recognise that.
Yeah. Thanks, Anthony. There's some great points there. I think I wonder whether part of the key to that helping smaller companies to engage with both academia and other industrial companies might be. It's again about this point. I think that some people in the chat room, Phil, I think, on the panel here, introduced about sort of joining up funding streams. And one of the ones I think of, we work with combined authorities, local enterprise partnership kind of activities. They have sort of energy accelerator funds, those sort of things, which sometimes can be, and it's about the marrying of these things together, isn't it, to see if we can bring the essential ingredients together, I think, for me. Thank you. Amna, have you withdrawn your hand? You've withdrawn the comment.
Yeah, sorry, it was an accident. I don't think I want to hog the speaking session.
No problem at all. We've literally got a few minutes left, I think. I guess, is there? Thank you for the people in the chat room who've been both commenting and feeding back. I just maybe ask, maybe before we close off, I need to hand back to Yolong in a minute, I think. I might just see if there's anyone on the panel who wants to offer a final sort of comment. I see there were some specific questions, so if anyone on the panel wants to pick up on any of those in the chat and maybe just throw an answer out back to some of those. I see that Mitchell's been pretty active on some fairly specific questions. So if anyone's going, for example, so if anyone's got any answers on those, please do that in the chat room. But just before I hand back to Yolong, anyone on the panel want to get anything else off their chest, I suppose, in response to some of the questions we've had? Just before we hand back.
I think I'll do it. I know I said I wouldn't, but I'll just comment, because I know I've said, our messaging can improve, etc. But we are trying really hard to engage with policy and academia. And as an SME, maybe we're not as good with the marketing and etc. But just to all the academia out there, we've got loads of research opportunities and a lot of difficulties and challenges as an industry and as a sector that we'd like to overcome. So please do reach out, and we'd be, we've got a few opportunities for early career researchers, as the Supergen would know, and we'd love to work together. And I think I've also seen, from Philip's comment earlier about dual industrial and academia, I've also seen sometimes there's a misalignment between that, and again, communication comes in between, because sometimes what the industry is looking for and what academia is researching is actually almost the same thing, but with different purposes. And I think to align on that purpose, we can all, there'll be greater synergy achieved. So I'm here's to, I don't know if this is an offer or just a comment to just say, here's to hoping there's more synergy between us and more thought out plans and communication, and with objectives achieved together. So fingers crossed to that, and it's going to be really exciting.
Great comment to end on, Amna. Thank you. Great comment, great view out of your window, Birmingham City Centre as well. So thank you on both counts. Yolong, over to you. Thank you, panel.
Thank you, Jim. And so we can see there's so much opportunities, or so many opportunities and challenges as well, and for academic to work with the industry, and there are lots of questions that remain, just want to say, there's we only have 30 years to go, and for any new technology to be developed, it have to be quick. So I think as a final, I want to thank all our speakers and give a wonderful presentation, and also our panel members for the great discussion, and all our attending participants for the questions and the comments. And I think the recording has been done, so I think everyone will be able to access the recording in the future. And so finally, I want to thank the supporting team, particularly from Bioenergy Hub, and also from my side as engineer from Energy Storage Network, for helping me with that logistic aspects. And finally, thank you all for attending. And there will be programs tomorrow as well. So everyone is welcome. And finally, thank you very much, and have a great evening. I think it's a sunshiny just coming in Birmingham, so it's great. Thank you. Bye-bye.